Howdy everyone, and welcome back to The More You Grow. I have a really cool project that uses a trick that I think a lot of you homesteaders and gardeners are really going to like. What if I told you you can grow tomatoes this big in just 2 weeks for only pennies? Before you think I'm crazy or I'm a liar, let me tell you what I'm talking about. I took these tomato plants from cuttings rather than from seeds, and there's a few advantages and disadvantages to that. A few of the advantages are that you get tomatoes this big in 2 weeks. Another advantage is if it's a variety that you really like that's hard to find, this is a clone of that tomato. And speaking of clones of a tomato, if you've got a tomato variety that does really well, or you find one tomato plant that does a lot better than the others, and you want to have that tomato next year, you just take a cutting and it'll be the same exact tomato next year. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages to this method. Probably the biggest disadvantage that I can think of to this is that if the tomato plant that you take your cuttings from have a disease, a virus, or have some pest on them, you could be potentially carrying those in on your cuttings and putting those in your garden the next year. And the way I would say to get around that is just be sure that the tomatoes that you take your cuttings from are healthy, pest-free, and generally show no signs of any kind of problems like that. And you never really know for sure. There's no way of fully telling, but just use your best judgment, and if it's worth the risk, I say go for it. With all that being said, I think there's a lot of potential benefits that outweigh the risk of growing tomatoes from cuttings. It's all about just knowing what to look for and using your best judgment. So let me take you back a few weeks and show you how I got all these tomato plants started from cutting. Let's go check it out. So the first step to getting tomato cuttings is you have to have tomatoes. This is the tomatoes we've been growing at Howdy Farm for the last summer, and we're taking these cuttings now because it's getting cold out here. I mean, I'm the kind of weird person out here. I'm in short sleeves, but I don't know how much longer these tomatoes are going to be here. So we're going to get cuttings off these, start some tomato plants, and I'll show you what to do after that. I've got my lovely assistant here, Marissa. She's going to help me out because they planted the tomatoes in the middle of the bed where wheelchairs don't go. So let's get some tomato cuttings. The first step in getting cuttings, you got to have a cutting tool. Only tool I've got right now is a little knife. And the first step you want to do with that is you want to clean it. You don't want to have anything on your knife that could get your plants sick or kill them, anything like that. So I'm going to clean my knife with a little alcohol swab. I'm going to hand it over to Marissa, and she's going to take our cuttings. I'll talk about the cuttings a little bit once we get them. It's great. So Marissa's out here being my lovely assistant. What we're looking for are little cuttings like this. We'll have her hold one up here in a minute. We're looking for ones that have this terminal new growth on it that are going to be actively growing. And we're going to fix these up a little bit more when we get these to a bench where we can work with them a little bit. But you're just looking for this new growth here at the end. Alright guys, so we have our tomato cuttings, and let me show you a little bit closer of what we're looking for in a cutting. You want to find a cutting that's got some good stem on it and it's got an actively growing tip. You want to make sure it's got a terminal bud going. You don't want to like take a clipping of like this leaf here, and you don't want to do that. That's not going to make a cutting. If it has flowers on it like this one does, take those off. We don't want those on our cutting. So what we want to do now is we want to take these and get them rooted. The first thing you're going to need to get your cuttings rooted is some form of rooting media. In this case I have perlite, and perlite is just expanded clay that's been heated to expand. It holds water well, allows for good air exchange, and just it's a good material to do cuttings in. I do all my cuttings in perlite. The next thing you're going to need is some form of rooting hormone. You can get this in your garden centers, and what this does is it's a hormone that when we put it on the end of our cutting, it's going to signal for it to start producing roots, and that's going to get our cuttings established and rooted to where we can put them in pots of potting soil after that. But you want to take this, it comes in a little container that looks like this, and they're going to come in different containers, but it'll be in a little container. On this one, if you have one like this, see this big giant leaf over here? We're going to take that off because we don't need that. That's just going to take nutrients and water away from our cutting. You want to have a cutting that just got a few leaves at the top and just cut down on your moisture loss a little bit. We're going to take our cutting there, cut it at a 45, like so. Trim up this little excess here. And there you go. Got us a 45-degree angle there. So the reason why we're cutting this at a 45-degree angle on the tip is because that's what's going to give us the most surface area to take up water, take up this rooting hormone, all that good stuff. The more surface area you have on your cutting, the better. So we just take this, dip it in our water, get our rooting hormone here. We're going to roll it in that a little bit, get it nice and coated, shake off, tap off the excess. Got a nice coating on there, and we're just going to take that and going to put it in our perlite. And I just kind of dig down in there, find a spot, cover it up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep filling this pot up with cuttings until there's not much space left. You don't have to worry about spacing as much because they're not going to stay in this. We're just getting them rooted in this, and once they have little roots on them, we're going to put them in their own pot. So you don't have to really worry about space as much until you get roots on them and you need to transplant them. So I'm just going to keep filling this pot up with cuttings until it's all full, and I'll show you what to do after that. While I'm sitting here cutting on these, let me tell you a few good tips when it comes to taking cuttings. It's good to take a lot of cuttings so that way you have better odds of success. So that's why I take quite a few cuttings. So that way, if only a few take, that's okay. I started a bunch and we'll see how many we get started out of this. Hopefully all of them. That would be nice. It would be nice if we get all of these. And while I'm sitting here working on these, this is a really cool variety of tomato. These are called watermelon tomatoes. And that's new for me. I've never seen these before. I think this is the last one. Get this one rolled in our rooting hormone. Tap off that excess. Nice little coating. We're going to put that one right here in the middle. So I've got all these potted up. I may trim a little bit more on them, just depending on what I see as they go along. And the next step is, actually, we're going to need our bag again. We're going to need our plastic shopping bag. Just any place will do. And to hold on to more of that moisture, we're going to take this and put it right over the top, just like that, loosely. And that's going to hold on to more moisture. We're going to wrap it up a little bit down here at the bottom. That's going to hold on to more of our moisture, and it's going to allow these to stay humid inside and not dry out as quickly compared to if we didn't have this bag on here. So now that we got this on here, all it is a waiting game. We're going to make sure to keep the perlite moist, give it a water every so often to make sure it stays moist. It'll stay moister in a shallower container that's wider just because of gravity. I'll show you all a cool trick with that here in a little while about potted plants. But we're going to use this because it's what we got. We're going to keep this bag over the top. We're going to kind of fold it up underneath on the bottom to keep the bag kind of tight, keep that moisture in. So now what we're going to do is wait for these to root, and once they do, we're going to transplant those out. I'll show you how to do that next. Alright guys, so it's been about 2 weeks since we've done our tomato cuttings, and let me show you what they look like now. Look at that. This just got out of the perlite. Look at that root action. That is awesome. Now, not all of the cuttings have rooted yet. Some of them haven't rooted. They still look fine. They're still looking lush, so I just left them in there to continue to try to root. And sometimes you're going to have some cuttings that don't root at all, and that's just what happens. That's why you do multiple cuttings in case some of them don't root. But we're going to take these now, and we're going to go put them in pots of potting soil to let them grow through the next couple of months till we can come plant them out in the garden. So let's go do that, and I'll talk about it a little bit more along the way. So all that's left is to take our cuttings that are now rooted and to pot them up in just some general purpose potting soil. I'm going to put mine pretty deep because even though the roots are down here, if I pot it up to about here maybe, the rest of this stem up here may become more roots, and the more roots we have, the better. So I'm just going to pot this up and I'll show you what it looks like after I get done. So now we have our cutting all potted up. I have most of the stem below the soil so that way it can become more roots. The more roots we have, the better. I'm going to water this down because the soil is pretty dry, and I just want to keep this moist. I don't want to get it waterlogged or just soaking wet all the time. Just keep it moist and just let it grow in my garage over the next couple of months. I keep my garage about 50 degrees or higher all the time because I've got my tropical plants in here. But if you have a nice sunny window with good light and just give it a little bit of water and good warmth, that's all this really needs. So that's all there really is to it, you guys. I'm just going to keep these in the garage, keep them growing. I'll give you updates along the way as they grow and let you know how they're doing. But if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you have any more questions for me on anything I did in this video, leave them down in the comments. And if you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can be there for when all the new videos come out. And until next time, I hope you'll join me right here on The More You Grow.